All right, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out tonight to Rocky Mountain Angular. My name is Jesse Sanders, and I'm going to be your presenter tonight. And we're going to talk about, so you want to do Redux. We'll dig into that in just a minute about what. So let's talk about the agenda a little bit tonight. One of the things I want you to get from this is understand when to implement Redux. So we're going to take a look at a case example here, a real example of a website that's out there that I was asked to take a look at. And we're going to take a look at why we might consider doing Redux and dig into a little bit of code and start to look at when should we do this and when should we not do this. Another thing I want you to do get from this is how to plan to upgrade a project. So it's one thing to decide, okay, hey, great, we're going to upgrade. We think we can reduce some complexity here, but how would I actually create a plan? How would I go about attacking this problem and breaking this down into something bite-sized versus just going, gosh, this just seems a little overwhelming to go from a project that's gotten a little bit of legs here, it's gotten a little bit out of control, and now we want to take it and get it back under control. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about containers versus presentation components. So what are the differences? When do you use them? How do you create them? What are their jobs? And what are the considerations for these? So another item we're going to talk about is identifying entities and actions. So we're going to actually look at how we're going to take our existing code base and start to transfer this over. And part of this is looking at what are our entities, what are our actions, and then we're going to dig into reducers, and we're going to look at how we do this other thing, kind of like this lift and shift, a very simple conversion. So we don't want to have to rewrite our entire application, right? We want to be able to salvage as much of it as we can, but we still want to be able to get it over to Redux and do this as easily as possible. And so, like I said, we're going to go through a real code example. So there's a website called ng.io. Is anyone familiar with the site at all? So if you don't know, this is a site that is written by Joe Eames and maintained by him and, well, his latest developer that's working on it, which would be me. Him and I have been collaborating on it and looking at how we could how we can improve the site and also how to get it updated to NGRX Redux so that make things a little simpler. So we're going to just flip over here really quick. If you haven't seen the site, it's pretty simple. I'll blow this up just a little bit. But basically, we got our toolbar up here. We've got a little search area over here, and we've got our list of articles. I can go ahead and click on an article here. So Night of Angular, this is the one that we did a couple weeks ago. Opens up a new tab, and hey, boom, it takes me right to the blog article. It'll take you straight to a video, whatever that content is. So what they do is they allow people to go ahead and submit articles to the site, and then they go ahead and curate them, make sure that it's legitimate, that it's not just some garbage thing, and then they make sure they apply proper tags to it so that then you as a developer, when you're looking for an article on, let's say, AOT and whatever, you'd be able to find something that would be relevant and not just find things that are, let's say you want to look at components, but you don't want to find the Angular JS version and have to weed through a whole bunch of stuff that's no longer relevant to you. So on the front end here, it looks pretty simple, right? There's really not a whole lot to do here. It's pretty easy, but actually this page is a major pain, okay? Because there's some other stuff going on here that we'll take a look at in just a second. So when would we want to implement Redux? The number one answer I hear is academic, because I want to. And that's a really bad decision. Because that in itself, if it's your own pet project, it's a great idea, learn it, dig in, get in there. But otherwise what happens is that we're seeing a lot of people decide to go ahead and do Redux when it's really not necessary. There's very limited complexity, it's very easy, there's not a lot of reuse, and it doesn't make sense for an organization to take that on. If we can reduce complexity, then that's really the primary reason. Another reason that we may get into is around predictability and maintainability. So what I mean by predictability is, you ever had that race condition issue where, hey, you're loading products, you're loading orders, and you're loading roles, and roles always shows up last? So I start showing stuff to you that I shouldn't be showing you because of this race condition that's occurring. And then we write some really bad code usually. It's of the finest nature. It's usually set timeout, and I'm going to wait for this. Or I build a Christmas tree chain as I keep going in, as I wait for this one. Okay, first load this one, now load this one, now load this one, and it kind of Christmas trees in and Christmas trees back out. So you can actually eliminate those sorts of things with Redux and make your apps more predictable. So given a given state, your app will render the same exact way every single time. It's deterministic. It's not, there's no like random, oh, well, it might render like this. No, based on a given state, it's always going to render the same exact way. Maintainability is also another really big reason. As we look at an application, and you think about it, you wrote an app, let's say 6 months ago, and it started to get a little bit complex, maybe started to get away from you a little bit. There's a lot of eventing going on. You're emitting a lot of events and subscribing, and maybe you've put these down into a service to help you manage that complexity. I think actually when you start to get to that level, when you start to have, you realize it's starting to get complex and you're starting to push stuff down into a service, that you might actually be a candidate for Redux at that point. Because now you're starting to realize there is some complexity. I've got all these components that are communicating, and then I start to notice that, wow, I think I had 6 different loads to load the same exact product list. And I don't know who's loading what and what event's causing what, and it's really hard to start tracking it. So the maintainability, the problem happens here is I wrote it 6 months ago, and I go in and add a new component, and I don't really remember what I did 6 months ago, let alone yesterday, right? And so I'll go in and start to add a new feature, and that feature now is going to fire off its own method. It's its own event, which is then I don't really know what's actually going to be affected by that. So the maintainability goes up by using something like Redux because there's only one source, the store, and how we dispatch events, we can get a much better control over what's occurring here. So what was I read the other day? I was watching a video the other day about testing, and it says, I love testing. And then he's like, hold on, let me think about this. No, I love the idea of testing. and I think that's really true because we do all love the idea of tests, right? What could be better? I could write a test one time and I can run it forever and I'll always know whether or not this thing is going to pass or not. The reality is, though, that testing becomes arduous. It's tough. We look at frameworks like Protractor and to do end-to-end testing, and they're fragile, and half the time they fail for just bizarre reasons. And then we start to look at our unit tests, and I see this a lot. We go to refactor something, right? And we go to refactor it, and we do all this refactor, and then we run the tests, and we're like, oh, man, 200 tests broke. Okay, I gotta answer that. Comment, highlight, comment. Ta-da, we're done. Whew. Our code coverage slowly sinks back down to unacceptable levels. Redux is a really great way to reduce complexity as in your testing as well. So in your app and in your testing. So everything is broken out into smaller components. And the ease of testing, which actually I'm going to have a talk on in, I believe, about a month or so on using a product called Jest to do your testing with. And you'll see how easy that is to do and maintain. All right, so let's talk about, well, before we get to planning, we're going to come back over here. We're going to take a look at a little sample of code. So I showed you the site and what the web page looks like. Here we're going to dig into the home page. The home page itself is pretty simple. I like this. We're down to 10 lines of HTML. That looks great. I go look at the TypeScript for it. All right, not too bad. We're under 100 lines. Nothing too complicated going on here, though we start to get into some large blocks here about loading, and if the filters default, then get recent articles. Otherwise, we're going to go search for articles using this filter data. All right, and then we got to get tags of articles, but yeah, overall not too bad. This one over here is a little worse. The number of lines of HTML is fine. It's a relatively not complex. Simple component here. You see the HTML for this. That's this guy right here. Pretty simple. But when we dig into this guy, he's about 150 lines, and we start to get into much more complex stuff. So on init, we're going to go get all tags, and we're going to subscribe to that, and we're going to sort them, and then we're going to show default tags. So if I go click on that, so then we set visible tags equal to the tags, so that tags is all tags, and we're then going to compare it to the default tags to see if they're in there. There's a lot of logic that's going on here, because basically there's three types of tags you show. And that's where you don't really see the complexity in the UI. When it first comes up and you haven't selected any tags, it's going to show you a default list of tags. Tags that are very common that we think you would want to see articles on. As soon as I search, or as soon as I click on one of these, so let's say I want components, great. Now I got a whole new list of tags. Well, those tags are based on what articles are loaded. Okay, so I get a list of unique tags from all the articles and then compile those down, and those are tags that are just for that. And then I have the other one where, well, we've got all tags, and then I also have tags that just match my current search. So really there's 4 different ways of looking for tags. And so what we found here when we were looking at the tags piece is it started to get really complex. We're always having to check the filter data on this and the filter data on that, and is it this or is it that? And so most of the logic that's in here is all around what tags to show and how to, if some tags are selected, then, and if this all tags visible, then show tags, otherwise show the default tags. There's just a lot of nested logic that's complex and difficult for us to maintain. Also, when we think about, and we're going to dig into this in a moment, this component could be really, really simple. And the way it's written right now, the only way that this component works is the way it's coded right here. And what I mean by that is this tag search component is only good in one spot in the application, unless everywhere else in the application is going to work the same exact way. Otherwise, I've got it hard-coded, and this is the only way that it's going to work. So what if I could simplify this, and I could make this guy dumb, if you will. He doesn't really know what tags. He just gets a list of tags, and he can just work with it and emit some events back out. And that's really what we're going to work towards tonight. So coming back here over to the planning side, we want to identify a complex page. I think we've sufficiently done that. We've got, I think, a good candidate that we can work with tonight. And then can I decompose a page or the components? Well, in this case, it's already fairly well decomposed. Might be able to take a little bit different approach on one of them, but for the most part, actually, it's been broken down. We've got on the top left-hand side, we've got our search component, we've got our articles list, and then an individual article for each row that's being shown for articles. So it's actually fairly well decomposed. And we need to start thinking about what events and actions does my page need to support. So let's talk before we get into, actually let's go back to that. So the actions and events that my page needs to support. When you're starting to think about converting your application over to Redux, you need to look at, okay, well, what are the basic actions here? Well, I need to be able to load a list of recent articles. So when I come in initially, I need to load recents. I need to be able to search for articles for whatever criteria is given. So it could be by keyword up here, and I can get rid of all that. I can reset the filter. Oh, that's good. Oh, actually, hold on. Did we crash? Let's just make sure our server didn't crash. We'll come back to that. So we need to be able to load articles by searching. We need to get a list of all tags, and those are pretty much the major operations that we need to do here. Some of the more minor ones that aren't as obvious is I need to be able to add a tag, selected tag. I need to be able to remove a selected tag. I need the error to stop happening. Oh, you know what it is? I'm pretty sure I know. Yeah, this is called shutting it down earlier. To push a change, there we go. So I do know the error handler piece that I wrote does work quite well. All right, so with that, we've identified some of the actions and events. we've talked about articles. We need to be able to load recent. We need to be able to search for articles using some filter data. On tags, we need to be able to load all. We need to be able to get a list of default tags. And we need to be able to get a list of all the tags that are, all tags, unique tags for articles that are currently loaded. There we go. So let's talk about container components and presentation components really quick, because this is really important to understand. One, container components are concerned with how things work. They're the glue. So if we think about container components, they're going to contain both presentational and container components, potentially. Other container components, if you will. So container components, you might have heard them called smart components. We had smart components and dumb components. Well, the dumb components protested, and so we got politically correct, and now they're presentational components. So container components provide data and behavior to other components. So data is pretty obvious. We've all created a child component and then passed async data down to it, right, when it resolves, right? It's pretty common practice. But behavior is not something that we typically do a lot of. Sometimes we do it. Behaviors are when we have a component that has outputs, and it's going to emit a deal saying, hey, somebody click the save button. And here's the product or whatever it is that you're supposed to do with it. And then the container component can decide what save to call. So let's say if we're on an add new page, well, it could say, well, we don't need to call update. We're gonna make sure we're gonna dispatch a insert instead. So this way we can change the functionality of a component, how it works, based on the parent, not on the child. When we hard code the child, then the child it's the only way that they can work. By moving that logic up to a container component, now we can take and reuse that child in other ways. So these container components are often stateful. They serve as data sources. So they're the ones making the calls and getting the data from the store. So, and then they're going to pass that down. They're going to unwrap the observables and then pass the data directly to the child components. So the child components don't need to know anything about observables. They're just getting a new set of data, and then they are responsible for how things look. They're about being pretty. They're about, hey, how do I take these articles and display them so that you're going to like them, right? So they could contain both presentational and other container components, potentially. They have no dependencies on the rest of the app. In most cases, they really don't know what's going on. So they'll have no references to the store. They'll have no references to services. They're usually getting everything that they need on an input. And anything any event that they want you to respond to, they're going to do on an output. And they're going to emit an event. So again, they receive their data and callbacks all via props. So they're usually using unwrapped data rather than observables. All right, great. So we've kind of identified pretty much everything we need here to start doing. The next step is we need to identify entities and create models. So when we look at and think about entities, two of them jump out to me right away, right? We have articles and we have tags. But the other entity that's not really obvious because it's not coming from the database is the article filter. Because the article filter is a keyword search here. So if I search for night, it'll find based on the title. I also have what version of Angular we're using. And then I can also then search by tags. What tags do I want to have it searched by, right? So that one's not coming from the database, but that is also an entity, and it's really more of a model. However, it's an entity that we want to track. We want to keep track of the filter state, because what we want to do is, if you think about Redux, we want to be able to re-render this exact page the same exact way that it is right now. So what's nice here, we actually went ahead and modified the URL up here, so when we change and we select a tag, that it does tags animations and puts that up there. If I take it back off, it'll go blank. If I do components, great. It'll do components. Did that actually filter? Well, I guess we have more components now. All right. And if I go ahead and I refresh this guy, oh, cannot get. It's because it's local. All right, that's bad. Excellent. Oh, now we can't get anything. Oh, wonderful. This is how this whole live coding thing goes. Article list components. Oh, interesting. All right, we're going to do a quick little switcheroo here. And we're going to go to ngdoc. Now, what's funny is I did this presentation in Kansas City the other week, and I was doing it with the ngdoc.io site because it's got more articles and whatnot. And unexpectedly, Joe went ahead and did an update and crashed the site. Right in the middle. And it's probably about 10 minutes or 15 minutes in the presentation. All of a sudden, I'm like, huh, that's weird. It's just stopped working. And I get a message from Joe later laughing. Sorry about that. So, all right. Yeah, I think he did. I think he heard I was. Yeah, that's right. He heard I was traveling. So entities are domain data for our purposes, and in most cases, they're loaded from an API. This could be products, orders, articles, tags, whatever it is for your domain. In our example, entities include the articles, tags. Oh, we didn't even talk about users. So we've got users, including. We also have authors as well, and article filter. So for each entity, we want to go ahead and create a model. So the first step in this is we're going to go ahead, in our case what we did is we created an articles folder. So over here in the new code under source, we just collapse all that and get back. Let's close those. App. We went ahead and created an articles folder. And inside of articles, we created a models folder. And then we went ahead and created article. And coming back over here to our slide, here's a scaled down version of our code here. So we have export interface I article. This is kind of you don't have to put the I in front of it. That's kind of an old C# or Java thing for declaring interfaces, and sometimes hard for us old guys to get this out of our heads. But these are the properties of an article, and pretty simple stuff, right? Just standard definition for an interface. Oh. All right. So in our case here, going back over to our code, we went ahead and created the model. You can see there's actually a couple models in here, and it's got a few more fields than what I declared. So here's I article. It's also got I full article, because there's another type of article that we're not going to talk about tonight. And then we have content types. Well, that's just an export. That's something else. We also did this, if we come over here, for tags. And on tags, we went ahead and created a models folder. And inside of tags, an I tag supports an underscore ID and a tag. So really simple. Next step here that we want to do is identify actions. So we started talking about actions a little bit earlier. An action is any event that we want to handle, whether it be system events or user events. So the NG.io homepage needs to support loading recent, searching articles, and loading tags. Actions like load need to support 2 additional actions. So when you think about a load, what actually happens is there's 3 parts. And this may not be obvious to you when you're making service calls, but basically you have the call itself to say, hey, I'm loading, and right before I do it, I usually, if I'm doing some sort of loading indicator, I say, loading's true, right? And then I make the load call, and then the other 2 parts of the load are, hey, what happened when it goes well, and what happens when it goes bad? So I have to have a success and fail action as well, because I need to be able to handle those. Again, you need to think about Redux as a state. And so what if we want to recreate the state of the application for a failure when they loaded articles, based off this filter data and all these other things? So again, you have to think about it in a store in Redux. It's holding all of that state for us so that we can recreate it at any given point in time, and that gives us that ability to time travel backwards and forwards and be able to see how the application responds. So this is just one of those that we need to support. So creating actions. Really simple. We're going to create an actions folder. We're going to create a In our case here for articles, inside the actions folder, we're going to create an articles TypeScript file, and then we're going to import the entity model for articles, and then we're going to create an enum to define our actions. So this is going to give us a reliable way that we can not just use string representations, because then we end up having actions that we call that don't fire because we had something uppercase or lowercase and not quite the same way or misspelled, and so it just makes it really nice. And then we're going to create action classes. There's a couple different ways that you can handle actions. You don't have to create classes. This just makes your life a lot easier and also gives you some type checking. And then we're going to export the class types. This gives you the opportunity to be able to pass those types of those functions or of those classes around for the actions in case you want to reuse those in a little bit more non-traditional way, but you could be able to pass a reference to that action function that way. So take a really quick look here at an action enum example. So in our case here, we're defining an enum called action or article action types. We're supporting load recent, we're supporting search, load success, load fail, and select. So pretty simple, not a whole lot of magic there. It's just an enum. Now I can just say article action types dot, and I see a list of the types that it supports. It makes it really nice and easy. So the next one is creating action classes. So each action that we just defined is going to get its own class. Each class implements the action interface, and it's going to have a read-only type property that is set to that enum value. That way, if we need to figure out like what type this is, we can always check the type on it. If the action expects a value, then we're going to go ahead and use a constructor, and we're going to make the members of that constructor or the parameters of those constructors public, and they can be typed. So the beautiful thing about this is this prevents you as a developer or the next guy that comes along, which will probably be you 6 months from now, when you come along and decide to start adding stuff and you're calling actions and you're passing numbers and it's expecting an object. This is going to go ahead and type check that for you, and you're going to get an answer immediately and not later in production where we usually find most of our bugs, right? So let's take a look at an action class example here. So I've got two really simple ones. Load recent articles. So it's got a read-only type equals, and here's our enum, load recent. Very simple. Load success is the same way. We set our type to the enum. Here, though, we need a constructor because when we're doing a search, or I'm sorry, load success. We're doing a load success. We need a payload, right? And we're going to take that payload and put that into our state using our reducer later. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so here's the real trick to this. If you're using classes and you don't use public on the constructor variables, you're going to have a really hard time. It's a really simple one to miss and a really painful one to figure out, because the answer that you get from the compiler about what's wrong, it's like completely off in left field. And when you go do searches for what known issues out on the NGRX library, it's usually pointing you down some rabbit hole that's taking you way far away from where you want to be. All right, so then the last one here is exporting class actions. These class types can be used as parameters later in other functions. And here's a really simple example. I'm exporting my type, article actions, and I just set it equal to load recent article, search articles, load success, load fail. Really simple. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like in code. All together. So here we're going to look at our actions for articles. So you can see, is that big enough for you guys? Let me make that a little bigger. Let's get rid of our terminal since it's dead anyway. All right. So here are our article action types. We're supporting search, load recent, load success, load fail, select, pretty simple stuff. And then we've got our classes, searching articles, load recent articles, load article success, fail, select. Those are all pretty simple. Again, if you look at them, the ones that we need types for, we need to pass a parameter for, like the filter. When we're searching, we need to have a filter that we're going to use. And so when we want to pass that filter in, we go ahead and just create our constructor, public, filter, and I'm making it any. Now, technically, I could actually fix this really quick, and I could call it iArticle filter, and that would be more correct, because that's actually what it's using. When we're passing it a filter, we're not just allowing it to search on anything. It does have its own structure. So, all right. Any questions so far? We good? All right. All right, so creating reducers. Reducers modify the store state. But remember, the store state is immutable. You can't just go change properties on it. There's a particular way that you need to act upon it. There's the idea between when you're storing stuff into the store, whether you want to store it as arrays or you want to store it as dictionaries. I did a talk this past October at Angular Mix, and we talked about this exact subject with a new library called NGRX Entity. And that entity library allows you to take array data, convert it to dictionaries, and then using selectors, get it right back to array data. This makes it really, really easy, especially when you're dealing with nested data. The idea here is if you're using nested data, your reducers are going to be a new Hades for you to live in. It is impossible to test. It's easy to blow it up. I found out how easy just writing a presentation on it that was fairly simple. And all I was trying to do was add a comment. I had a blog, and I was just adding an additional comment to the comment array. And I corrupted my store instantly. And I didn't even realize it. It took me like, I don't know, a day to all of a sudden go like, wow, that's really kind of weird what it's doing there. I wonder what's causing that. And I pull out the Redux inspector, and I'm like, oh, this is something bad. And it was really that easy to go ahead and corrupt it. So if you're thinking about, you've got nested data especially, you want to use dictionaries. That way you can reference stuff by its ID, and you can look it up by ID using the dictionary. In the dictionary, your ID is the key, and your value is the object. So if I want to find an author with the ID of 2, I just say, get from the store authors and give me the one with a key of 2. Bam, I've got my object. Very, very simple. So we talked about nested data. We talked about NGRX entity. If you want more information on this, you can go out to our BrieBug channel. We've got a great presentation that we recorded while we were at NGRX, where we were at Angular Mix, and it'll dig into that a little deeper. So NGRX entity has basically a few features here. It has the adapter. That's what does really all the heavy lifting. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail about what we're going to do here. We're going to look at a couple slides, but we don't really have time to go through like how entity works and how the adapter really works. The main thing is it manages the dictionary. It has a group of, I think about 6 or 7 methods, static methods on it that you can call for adding a single item, adding multiple, removing single, removing multiples, updating, and I think clearing all of them, something like that. It also has I believe about 4 or 5 default selectors that you can pull in very quickly. We'll take a quick look at that as well. And by using NGRX entities, what you're going to get is simple reducers. The idea here is that if you have a reducer that's more than really 1 or 2 lines, you probably have a bad reducer, for each action type, right? And we'll take a look at an example here. All right, so we're going to look at entity state example really quick. Like with any reducer, we're going to go ahead and declare an app state. In our case, we expect to be able to get articles and article filter out. We're also going to create a new interface called article state that extends entity state using the article model. Now, what happens here when you create an entity using the entity library is it creates a dictionary. It's an object that has 2 properties in it. IDs, which is a list of all the IDs in the order that they should be rendered, and it has another property called entities. And that's the actual dictionary object that has all of your data in it. So what we can do is we can go ahead and extend the entity state and add additional properties. So in this case here, I want to know what's the selected article ID. I want to know what's when it's loading, and I want to know if there's any errors. So this is really app data that I want to move down to the article state so that I can easily get a hold of it and I don't have to go select it from another store and go get it. You don't have to do it this way. This is just one way that you might approach a problem. All right, so the next one we're going to do here is the entity adapter. We're going to use a function called create entity adapter. And we're going to go ahead and create a new entity adapter using the article model again, and it's going to be called article adapter. In our case here, we're passing it two different properties. This is totally optional. You don't have to do these. Again, I'll cover this in more detail in that other talk. But since our ID is not just ID, it's actually underscore ID, we have to tell it what the selected ID is. So that's how we map that. And in the sort compare false, this is only here so you can see it. If sort compare is false, don't put it in there. You only really use sort compare is if you're putting a function on it. So if you're using a compare function and you want to go ahead and sort it, and we'll take a look at an example of that a little bit later as well. All right, so then the last one here is we're going to go ahead and create our initial state. It's using the article adapter we just created called getInitialState, and then we're setting our other three extra properties. We're going to set our selected article ID to null, loading to false, and error to null. Pretty simple. So that's about as far as we're going to get into the entity adapter today, but we will look at it. You will see how it's used here. Here we're creating a standard reducer. Our state is going to equal our initial state, and our actions are set to our article actions. It's hard to say. And then that's going to return articles state. We're going to go ahead and switch on our action type. And in our case here, whether we're doing a load recent, or a search, we're really doing the same thing. We've since actually removed this line of code. I didn't get it out of the slide here. But basically, we're going to return the same state that it is right now. So we're going to spread our existing state, and then we're going to overwrite it saying loading is true and error is false. Because we could have been from an error state and still had the error on it, so we want to make sure we clear whatever error would have been on it off, and we want to go ahead and set loading to true. So pretty simple. Dig down into here on our load success. Here's our adapter coming back. So now what we're doing is we're taking our initial state, because I don't want to add the new payload of data to a bunch of old data. I did that on accident, by the way, earlier, and it was like, well, that didn't really work so hot, because even though I was filtering for other stuff, I still was getting my recent articles list and plus my filtered stuff, which is being added to it. So that really wasn't what I wanted. So I want to take my initial state, I want to combine it with my action payload. Boom, those get merged together. So my article adapter just took the payload and converted that from array data to dictionary data, and put it right into the, or it's going to put it into the store for me. And then we go ahead and spread that. We spread that so we can turn around and then override loading and set it to false. Pretty simple. Load fail looks fairly similar, except for we're just going to take whatever the state was, we're going to return it. We could always set it if we wanted to just initial state. It really, there's no like one way to do this. It's really how do you want your application to work? However, in this case, we're going to go ahead and set loading to false. And then we're going to set error to be error while loading articles, something simple like that. So that's the one that we were having fun with earlier. It kept popping up, So it was hitting this when the load fail was happening. This was getting called in the reducer. Then the error was firing, and we kept seeing that fire. So we got one for select. So pretty standard. We come back over here to the code for it. Articles. All right. So here's our app state. Here's our article state, our articles adapter that we're creating. Notice I took the sort compare piece out. We don't need that. And we've got our initial state here. Everything else is exactly like we just looked at. Not a big deal. So really what I want you to notice here is that for the most part, what we're doing here in the reducers is recreating some of the functionality that we're doing when we get an event and we're subscribing to the observable, and we get an emit back, and we get data back. We're going ahead and starting to set up our data. We're doing the same exact things. If you think about the loading, let's find this again here, load success. When I get that, I want to take whatever the payload is and I want to assign it to some sort of variable, right? And I'm going to be using that in my component. That's typically what we would do. And then I would turn around and set loading to false, right? Well, we're doing the same exact thing. We're just kind of lifting and shifting this sort of stuff into our reducer. So really, we've had to do a little bit of work in terms of we've had to create a model so we know what we're working with. We've had to create a list of actions that we're going to support. So that's probably the most real work that you have to do when converting your application, is you're going to actually have to think about what your application does and what you need to support. The beauty is now once you have this written and we go, like I go to move on to the next page and start converting that over to Redux, I don't have to create a whole bunch of this stuff. When I want to go see a list of articles, it's mostly all there. I don't have to recreate. So I can now create, let's say, different dashboards or different ways of presenting the data on other pages, and I don't have to do any of this heavy lifting again. This is really as bad as it gets. And it's really, from my perspective, it's really, really easy, and the price that I'm paying a little bit up front, I'm getting massive value through the rest of the cycle of the app. So the next thing we want to talk about here is effects. So effects handle asynchronous operations. Anything where I'm calling like an API, I'm hitting a service, anything that's not going to return something immediately. And it's also going to handle my success and error blocks. The idea here is with effects, we want to do a lift and shift. We don't want to have to recreate a whole bunch of stuff. So here's the original code example, get recent articles. So this dot loading is true. Well, we actually move that over to our reducer, if you will. And then we call this article service get recent articles. We do a subscribe on that, and when we get our event emitted to us, we're going to take the articles that is emitted and we assign it to a local variable, and then we set this dot ready, which, by the way, that actually sets loading to false. And in this case here is really bad because there was no error handling. So if anything went wrong, it was just like, ta-da, nothing. And it just wouldn't tell you anything was going on or whatnot. So if you think about it, we'd have another block here for the error, and we'd need to really handle that. We're going to do some sort of growl or toaster message to let you know, like something went wrong, right? So literally, if we took this here and we copied it, this whole thing, and we copied it and we pasted it over into our effect, is basically what I did. So here is load recent articles. And I went ahead and then appended here, load recent articles. It's going to return an observable action. And I say equals this actions of type load recent. So this is basically how it registers and knows that this effect is going to handle load recent. And then from there, I have my switch map, and then I pasted in literally what I had on the other side from the old code, and it made a couple little minor modifications. So I'm still calling my get recent articles service, and then I'm going to use, they came out with this fairly recent on how to do this, is to use a pipe. And the beautiful thing about this is that if things go great, it'll use map. If anything goes wrong, it'll use catch error. Bam, we're nice and simple. So in our case here, we're going to go ahead and map the articles that are emitted from get recent articles. And we are going to then call or create a new action, article actions, load article success, and new it up with that array of articles. Okay, so the effects doesn't have to know who's doing what with anything, what's going on, where it's happening, how it's happening. All that's arbitrary, doesn't care. He'll go ahead and handle this action, load it, and if anything goes wrong, in our case here, we're getting an error, we're passing the error message, but if you remember what were we doing with it? We were just tossing that out, and because it really made sense to go like, well, I don't really like what the database is returning. I might want to take that and log it and do something like that, but I would really want to return a more friendly message that doesn't give my hacker friends any sort of message about what might be wrong and how they might be able to expose it, right? Just say, hey, error loading article. So I easily override that. So you can see this is kind of a lift and shift. It's really not a huge change from what we were doing in our old code here and get recent articles. It's just reapplying the same sort of principles and just spreading it out between a reducer, which is storing our data and how we update our data, and the effects, which is actually going out and loading it. And we have our actions, which just give me a definition of, hey, what do I support and what do I not support? What can I do with this? All right, so selectors. We're going to cover this real quick here. Selectors are really super powerful. If you think about your client-side NGRX store as a database, is a client-side database, then selectors are queries. The beauty about these, usually they go into the reducers folder, and a lot of times we'll put them in the index.ts file. They're composable. The beauty of them being composable is I can write a very simple selector. It's very easy to test, and then I can take that selector and make it an input for another selector. And we're going to take a look at a pretty mind-numbing version of this, and we'll talk about how we got to this point with it. But it made it really, really easy to take all this logic about which set of tags I'm going to show. Am I showing the default tags? Am I showing the article tags? Or am I showing a list of all tags? So, the other one with selectors is they are memoized. So memoized, basically they're cached. If they're given the same exact parameters again, they're going to return the same exact value, and they're not going to have to go through the recalculation. So you're going to have high performance. Think about this in terms of if you've got a dashboard and you're showing products in like 4 or 5 different ways, that they can all use the same, and they're all using the same selectors, or they're using, let's say, selectors that are within the chain. Those are going to each get memoized. And so even though the big one, when it goes to calculate and go, hey, what's up to this point, if that's already been calculated and it's using the same exact parameters, it doesn't have to go back through that chain. It just grabs the cache value and goes, bam, here you go. This can also bite you in the butt. We actually had to write a piece, and I'll show this a little bit later, about how we have to reset the memoization to say, hey, don't use that anymore, like reset, because it wasn't seeing the change, but we needed it to recalculate. So we talked earlier about the adapter. The entity adapter had a few default selectors. So using TypeScript destructuring, I can take from the article adapter get selectors, and I pass it the state, the select article state. I can go ahead and remap select IDs to be select article IDs. I can remap select all to be select all articles, and so on and so forth, right? So it gives us, what, four selectors by default right away. So just by doing select all articles, that will actually go out, take the list of IDs for the order that stuff's supposed to be in, and it's going to pull the stuff back out of the dictionary and give me back an array. Nice and simple. I don't have to do that. It's going to do it for me. So custom selectors. I can go ahead and create a custom selector. So let's say I want to create all article, or I want to select all article tags. We talked about this, right? I want to be able to get all article tags for all available articles. So in my case here, I'm going to reuse the select all articles, which, by the way, that's this right here. This is one of the default ones that come, from my adapter. And I'm going to go ahead and use that as an input. So I'm using create selector, and I can chain as many existing selectors as I want, and those then become parameters for the last function that's there. So in my case here, I'm going to get select all articles, so I now have an array of articles, and I'm going to map over those and return the article tags. So I'm not getting a unique list, but I'm getting a list of all available tags. And then I'm going to make that unique, and that's the next one. We'll take a look at some of these and kind of step through, and you can see how they're all being chained together. All right, that's going to be right now. So selectors. So we're going to go back over here to our reducers. We have index.ts, and we've created some constants here for getting the selected ID, loading flag, and get error, just getting those from the state. And then here's the actual selectors for those. Here's our default ones that come directly from the adapter. So here's the one we were just looking at for select all article tags. First we get our select all articles, and then we're enumerating through and getting a list of values. Down here we're getting, that's all articles. So this is where it can get a little confusing, because now I have a lot of different selectors, so I kind of got to look at what is it pulling in, and then maybe have to kind of go back up the chain a little bit to understand. So here I'm going to call select all tags. So first I'm going to select all articles. And from those, I'm going to do articles, reduce, combine arrays. I don't even remember what this does, honestly. All right, let's dig in a little further. Select unique tags, uses select all tags, and then goes down and filters to get us, making sure it doesn't already exist in the array. Yeah, I would honestly, I have to go back and take a look. I don't remember what that does. This is where you should document your code. This is a really good example. So let's come over to tags really quick and take a look at it, because it's got some really good examples that I'm hoping I'll be able to explain. All right, so one here is select default tags. And from default tags, we're creating a new selector called select default tags. First, we're going to call select tag strings. So in our case here, this is getting all tags and then just getting our tag tags, getting just a string array of all the available tags that are actually coming from the database. So the idea here on default tags is that we want to make sure that the default tag is actually listed in the database, because if it's not in the database, we shouldn't show it, because that means there aren't any articles with that tag. So then the next one we're going to do is we're going to use the article filter selector. So I'm actually pulling from another selector that's part of article filters, and I'm getting the get article filter. So I'm able to get my filter. So now I have a list of all tags and my filter. And then default tags here is actually just pulled in from a file, but we're going to go ahead and return the index of if it's greater than -1 for the existing tag. So basically, if this tag that we're enumerating over for the full list of tags is in default tags, and that tag's not already part of the filter tags, then we're going to go ahead and add it to the defaults. Yeah, go ahead.
Is select tag filter, is that passing its return value into article filter selectors article filter?
Okay, so select tags filter.
Is line 41 passing the return value into line 42, or is it just
No. It's actually collecting each one of these. So 41 and 42 are parameters 1 and 2 on line 43.
It's like a fork join almost. Okay.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the next one, select tags. So here we're getting our filter, we're getting our tag search, our tag strings, we're getting our unique tags from our article selectors. Okay, so from our article selectors, this is getting a list of all the tags that are loaded for current articles, plus our default tags. And then now look, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters for that function. This is where we're actually then determining based off of, we're able to move this logic out of our component and put it into selector so it's reusable. If we wanted to reuse this sort of logic in another spot, it's available to us. This is really truly that separation of concerns. We don't have a component that's trying to figure out like, hey, what version of tags am I supposed to be displaying here? It's just, hey, we've got a selector. It's going to help you figure that out. So yeah, you can chain these together, and it gets all the way down to, this is what we actually ask for from the home component. Get me a select filtered sorted tags. And that's all he knows about. And the actual component, which we're going to take a look at in a second here, doesn't even realize that. He just gets tags. He doesn't even know. So really very briefly here, on the article filter, we went ahead and created a model for our article filter. Keywords, tags, version, and show all tags. Pretty simple. Our actions here, we needed to be able to support adding a tag, removing, resetting, set the version, keywords, filter, because we just pass a filter to the filter, set show all tags, and then set tags. So we created classes for those, great, pretty simple. Here's what's kind of beautiful here. I created a single effect, and it's going to watch for, I can chain these together on my effect. If you set the version, the keyword, the filter, the tags, or call reset, then I'm going to get the latest from the store and get the article filter. I take that filter, I map it. I check to see if it's the default filter, basically saying, hey, if there's no tag selected, there's no keywords, and the version is set to 2+, I have a default filter. If that's the case, return a article actions load recent articles. So this effect here doesn't even know who's actually going to do anything with it. All he's doing is returning a new effect. He's taking one event and mapping it to another event. If we don't have a default filter and we have any sort of search criteria, then we're going to want to go ahead and dispatch a new event for search articles. But he's not even going to dispatch that. He's basically, since they return, effects return, where was that at? I don't know if we set the return type. We did not set the return type on this one, but we did this on a previous one. It returns the action, and so that actually gets emitted back out again. So not all actions result in a reducer getting fired. They might actually force another effect to fire, and that's really what we wanted to have here. Take one event and map it to another event. And in our case here, we're able to chain a whole bunch of them together, comma separated, and be able to have it respond on any one of these. Because if any one of these change, we need to go ahead and have one of these two functions happen. Yeah, go ahead.
When you say chain there, are you saying that it's looking for each one of these in succession, or just once all of them?
If any one of those happen, it's going to fire off.
If any one of those.
Yeah, if any one of those. So instead of having to write a separate one for each one, it's just the same darn logic over and over. I can go ahead and just chain these all together and say, if it's any one of these, have at it for me. So it makes it really nice and easy for us to handle that. The reducer over here is pretty simple as well. Basically, when let's say we're calling reset, we're just going to give it the initial state. Oh, by the way, notice we're not using the entity state here. We don't need a dictionary. All we have is a really simple object that we need to store. So just because you're using the entity library doesn't mean you need to use it everywhere. If we're dealing with app data like this, you don't need it. So in here, when we add a tag, we go ahead and create a new tag state, and then we go ahead and return that, spreading the old state with the new state, which just has tags on it. So really simple there. This allowed us to take all the logic about how we're updating state and working with the filter and very, making this thing very, very simple. It's super reusable, and we don't have all these if-then blocks about how we're dealing with the various changes. All right. So just as a refresher here, going back over here on the home search component, we had all this logic. So if we unselect the tag, we remove a tag. We were first then finding the filter tags to go remove it from there, and then we were splicing that tag based on that index. And if some tags are selected, and if all tags are visible, then show all this logic now goes away. All the loads that it was doing up here for getting tags from the service, and it was getting passed in the list of visible tags. Visible tags was the article tags. So we had all this kind of stuff going on and fairly complicated. So now what I want to show you is what things really look like. Under tags, I have components. And under here, I have a search component called home search. The HTML is basically identical. It's still about 38 lines of code. Made some really minor changes to that. We'll take a look at some of those here in a second. But really, there's not a lot of logic here happening. Our constructor, we're passing in a form builder. Inputs, I'm getting the filter data because I need to display what's been selected and what the current state of the filter data is, and I get a list of tags. I couldn't tell you what tags they are. I'm just a presentational component. I'm just worried about what things look like. Notice here, though, I have a whole bunch of outputs. So I could have controlled these here, and actually when I initially wrote this component, I just had it dispatching events to the store. I'm just going, oh, hey, just do this myself. And that's perfectly acceptable. You can do that. But the problem with that is that then that component is no longer really maximum reusable. The problem that happens is now when we change the version, it's always going to dispatch that exact event. And if I want to change the functionality based on the container that it's in, then I need to emit the events out and allow the container to say, hey, this is how I want you to work. Cool, I got it, the version's changed. This is what we're going to do about it. On a couple of the events that happened, we actually went ahead and handled those locally to some level. They're still emitting the event up, and it's still going up to the parent. But we want to, when we select a tag, we want to clear any tag filter that we might already have. So if I'm searching for components and then I select that tag or any tag, I want to clear the tag search. And so I want it to then go ahead and call the tag search emit as well, and I want to have it go ahead and do a search tag forms reset. Now all the other emits, or all the other functionality that was going on here, so let's take a look at, on key up, we used to call tag search change or something like that, and that was actually calling a local function within the component. However, since I have the output already, and it's all it was going to do is turn around and that function would just call tag search emit with the tag search value, we went ahead and just moved that into the HTML. So it's super, super simple. It's lightweight. This is really easy to test. So imagine, would you want to test the old version? Anybody want to test the old version, write code for that? Or would you rather test the new version, right? The new version's so much simpler. All I have to do is pass some inputs into it and then see if I do, if I click on something or do a certain action, does it fire and emit an event out for me that I can handle? Perfect. And if we come over here to our home page, where's home at? That's up here. All right. So our HTML is pretty much the same, except for app home search has a little bit more stuff to it. So here we're passing tags async, we're passing filter data async. And then we have a whole bunch of functions for events. So on show all, we want to call show all tags, keywords, and we'll get the event that's emitted up, so on and so forth. So fairly simple, nothing too awful complicated here. Now my container component home has control over this. So now we look over here on the container component. It has a little bit more code, but really not too far off. We're at about 100 lines of code, and on the old one, oh, no, that went away. There we go. We're at 83. But remember, in the old component, the container component had no control over what the child did. They just kind of ran the asylum, and whatever happened, happened. So we're paying a little bit of price and a little bit of code moved up to the container, but we're getting control over how it works. And we'll talk about one other thing here before we get done tonight, because we're just about done. Most of the code that's happening here, we're importing the store. We added some stuff for the router. I don't think that existed before. Maybe it did. Nope. No, we weren't dealing with the router at all over here. So we added some additional code about how we deal with the router and take the router params and get them updated and load stuff. So the first thing we do is we're loading all tags. We're going to just go ahead and dispatch, and we know we're going to need all tags, so we go ahead and load that. We could do that by firing and splitting, let's say like load recent. But then every time we load recent, load tags will get reloaded, and we don't really need that. So we went ahead and moved it up here to the parent component. On the init, from the store, we're getting observables for articles, tags, and filter data. So using article selectors, tag selectors, and article filter selectors. So very, very simple. Give me all articles. So I don't know if that's recent articles, searched articles. I don't care as a parent, container component. I'm getting my filtered sorted tags, great, and I'm getting my article filter. I'm also getting, for the page level here, we want to have an indicator for if we're loading or if an error occurs loading articles. If we want to also trap this for the tag errors and tags loading, we need to handle it here or push that down to the component, which we may want to do it at the component level, presentational. We have a couple things here. Unsubscribe to the loading. We want to set a local variable. This one here for the error, do some stuff. We have stuff here for handling the parameters, and when the filter data changes, then we want to go ahead and route ourselves to the new tags. So pretty simple there. But then this is here where we took all the child presentational component events and we moved these up. So now we've got our handler for show all tags. When that gets called, we call store dispatch, set show all tags true. And it'll go ahead and set that. Keywords the same way, each one of these, version, add tag, remove tag, reset, tag search. Now here's the one that I told you about. So on tag search, when we were doing the search, what we found is it didn't matter when I was resetting it or changing it. Once I searched one tag, it was always searching for that one. So if I was searching for component, it didn't matter what I changed it to, it always came back with component. So what we had to do is go ahead and once we dispatch the tag search change, that we wanted to go ahead and using that select, go ahead and call release on it. Call release, we go ahead and drop the memoization. That gets reset. So just something you want to keep in mind if you want to keep it from caching it and memoizing it, then this is one way that you can approach that. So, all right, so references for tonight. If you haven't gone out to NGRX platform, it's a great spot to start and look. They've got an example app out there. There's some great code to look at, and it's constantly changing. It's still evolving. We've also got this article called normalizing, it should be normalizing, state shape. And this is a great article. This is actually what I based a good part of the NGRX entity library on for the justification of why you want to normalize your data and you want to unnest your data and move them up to top level entities. It's a really great presentation. I highly recommend it. If you're doing Redux right now, you really should understand why you don't want to do this and the complexities and what moving towards a normalized client store will look like. There's a great article here on presentational and container components. This is written by Dan Abrams. And also another one, this one here is from Narwhal for NGRX patterns and techniques. This is great for looking at actions on the different types of actions that you can have. So when we took the one effect that was looking at, hey, if you change any one of these filters, and now I'm creating a new action from those, and we're remapping it, that's actually covered in this article. It's really great to understand what you can do with actions and how you can split those apart, especially using effects. So, and then the other one from Dan Abrams is you might not need Redux. So the thing I want you to keep in mind is that usually starting out when writing an app, unless you know it's going to be really complex, probably don't start with Redux. It's a lot of overhead. And if you have a really simple app and it's only going to be a couple users and there's not a whole lot of reuse and whatnot, then Redux might not be the answer for you. You might want to just do it normal. You might want to use something like MobX. So it's a very lightweight version of a Redux pattern. But if you know from the get-go, like, hey, this is going to be a big app, we're going to have a lot of complexity. I've started to map out what my actions would be, and I have a lot of reusable components. You probably save yourself a lot of time by going ahead and starting to create those actions and reducers and effects, and then you'll have that maximum reusability that you're looking for. Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So you're working with like React and Redux. There's a lot of kind of dev tools in terms of showing the current state, previous state, like upcoming state. Is there similar tools
Yes.
like that?
Yeah, it's the same tool actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there's an adapter or whatnot for it so that it works. Chrome plugin that. Actually, yeah, there's the NGRX dev tools. When you go ahead and bring that into the module, then that is available to you. You can start to step through state, and you can do time travel, all the same stuff. I think it's actually the same Chrome plugin.
Is that how you debug it?
Yeah, that's how I figure out a lot of like when things are going wrong, and I'm like, I don't really understand how this isn't working and why my code's not, how my code's broken. That's usually what I go to. Carrie?
So I have a question about an analogy. One of the problems you mentioned, we should get into Redux for. You're talking about how you have like 3 different calls out to an API, and it might be, one requires the last to complete first. And I can imagine a way to do that with this by just, waiting for that to occur and then sending out another one. But the one that I was thinking of when you said that was they all need to be sent, right? Normally we just do a queue all. So how would you do that with this? Would you store the promises for each thing, store a loading for each thing?
Well, you'd use effects because you're talking about asynchronous operations that are happening here. And so there's a couple different ways that you could do it. You could actually chain them together in the effect. Part of the thing.
Was there a helper for that?
Yeah, it's RxJS. Just in general, like with some of the RxJS methods, you can already go ahead and do these sort of synchronous operations if you need to. You might be able to bring in, if you don't want to do it that way, there's other libraries you could use to be able to do that, I believe. But yeah, using effects, you can control that a lot better. You can still run yourself into the same kind of problems. So you're still going to want to guard against making sure you've got the right data. Maybe you don't show products until you get roles. But really, the idea here is, but when you start writing your actions, and everything goes through the actions, and you write effects that then consume, if you will, those actions and handle those actions, then you don't have the chaos that's usually going on, which is, hey, I'll handle it. Hey, I just got this event. I'll load products myself. But products is already being loaded often and being put into a session service, right? And it's already available to me, but go get my own version, or I don't realize it's there, those sorts of things. When we start to have these constructs in place and we have this separation of concerns, and there's really, like, we're talking about articles and we're loading articles, well, we know, hey, I'm going to go look at what are the article actions already supported. This doesn't look like it supports it. Let me go look in effects. Is there anything that's calling the service that I need? No. Okay, so I'm going to create a new service, an action, an effect, right? And I'm going to wire those together. Now I know where to go look for it, versus when we start burying stuff deep into components, and then sometimes they're emitting events and saying, hey, somebody else go load it, versus I'll go load it, versus whatever. That's really what we're trying to do here. We're reducing complexity. If when you start implementing Redux into your application, you notice the complexity go up, it's probably a really good indicator that you probably need to get out of Redux. It might not be the best thing for you. Does that answer your question for you?
Sort of. You had that helper that you were using for all the different actions that you were going to catch on?
Sure.
I was just wondering, is there like a helper like that allows you to catch on all of them?
I believe kind of what you're looking for is in that Narwhal article that talks about the different types of actions and how you can act on them and split them, and it pretty much covers most of the major scenarios that you might want to do, and that's why I listed it as a reference in there, because it's a great resource for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Steve?
I have a couple questions. One, you might have covered this, but when you call recent articles or tags, is that making new API calls every time that happens, or are you just loading your entire database at once and just filtering it?
When it's actually, if it's getting handled by an effect, it's making the call.
And then my other question is, since you have this store that has your filter state, theoretically you could just persist that either to your server locally, and then next time you visit the app, pull that back up and be at the state.
Sure, and that's using the selector versus saying, if you automatically defer to say, hey, I've got to go ahead and fire this off to go, dispatch this event and go load that. So that I believe that's going to hit the effect, and the effect is going to attempt to go get it. Now, let's say if you use something like Service Worker, then Service Worker go ahead and intercept that call, return the cache data. It looked like it went to the database, and then you would get it from your selector. And your two questions are kind of really closely related. I was actually going to pause you between the two of them because it just kind of hit me. You don't always have to call the action to go get the data. If you know the data already exists, then just use the select. You don't need to go get it again. And in most cases, actually in most components, they're not dispatching the action. They're not saying, hey, go load me articles. If you're starting to do that, you're doing it the wrong way. Your component should call the selector. Your controller, in most cases, should call the selector to go get it. Only maybe at the top level controller, we go, look, hey, I know we need to load new articles. Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and dispatch that event. But otherwise, more often than not, it's, hey, just go get me the selector. So notice, If we go back over here on the, that was actually on the home page itself, tags, home. So notice here up at the top where we're loading articles. We're not. So it's not even, the home page that's responsible for displaying articles is not even loading articles. What actually happens is the filter handles it for us. Okay, and I believe what's actually happening is somewhere in here, it's getting, well, actually it's okay. I know where this is. Right in here, we're gonna go ahead and subscribe to our params, to our query params. We're gonna evaluate it, get the tags off of it, split it, and then we're just gonna call set tags, whether it's blank or it's got a tag in it. And then set tags, if you remember, over here on the article filter on the effect, hey, we got set tags right here. It's going to get the filter and it's going to evaluate and say, hey, is it blank? Do we have anything set on it? Is this a default filter? If it is, hey, just go get me load recent articles. And so he's going to handle it. So you do have in some ways here, like we wanted the article filter to really be controlling what the loads are, not the page. The page isn't the one that's really making the determination of what to load. We want the page to almost be dumb in terms of, hey, whatever the filter is, the filter's really loading the data, and then I'm just getting a selector to that data. Okay, you don't necessarily have to do it that way. We elected to do it because it actually made it simpler. Because otherwise what I had to do is I'd have to first tell the page, hey, well, evaluate, if it has this, then go load this, otherwise load that. And that same logic then was going to be duplicated over here on the tags, or for the filter, I mean. So again, there's no right, like one way to do it. There's probably a lot of wrong ways you can do it. But it's something for you to take a look at. Like, what's the way that you want to approach it? And then as you get in there and you do a little test and you work with it, you go like, maybe not. So what I was doing tonight is I was actually working on cleaning this up, and I removed a bunch of stuff because I was kind of working through different issues, and I went ahead and cleaned up the search and moved all the events up and out. So there was a truly presentational component, so I could show you that and make the home page itself be the container, and we could see how those event back up and how that really flows well together. But you don't have to do it that way. You could leave those and dispatch them below. You just need to understand the price that you're paying. And the price is you don't have as much reusability.
Where's the exact spot the store is created in?
That actually happens over in the app, I believe. This is the part that we do the least, right? I mean, I don't even think about it much.
You need to like bridge that question. Sometimes, I mean, the exact spot where it's
Right here. Basically, this is our app module, and we're going to go ahead and create the store module for root, and then we're going to pass into it the reducers for basically for articles. Use the article reducer, tags, article filter. This is what's setting up our store for us. So the other thing here, since we're in the app module, we have the effects module. If you're writing effects and they're not firing, it's usually because you didn't add them here to the for root on the effects module. So notice we have article effects, tags effects, and article filter effects. If I take article filter effects out, this whole thing just falls apart. Nothing happens. It won't fire. It'll act like it's doing stuff. However, the effects won't fire, and I'm actually not, I'm not loading any data. So a really easy way to get kind of twisted around the wheel on it. Here's the DevTools module that you were asking about. So the store DevTools module is the one, if you call the instrument on this, then this is the one that gives you that, that feeds that Chrome plugin. I can set it for max age. We have it set at 10, however you can make it, whatever. I highly recommend that you put that in there. If you're not using that, it makes it really tough to debug something that you can't see. Cool. Any other questions?